at the University of Windsor. And I'm here to share work that I did with colleagues at my previous institution at the University of Calgary, which is really focused on trying to redevelop our approach to delivering non-majors introductory biology courses. So in a non-majors intro bio course, really the main focus is to try to get our students to essentially grasp fundamental biology concepts because they really underlie many of our real life issues, things like public and personal health, pollution, climate change, the green economy, et cetera. But there's lots of challenges in getting non-majors really excited and engaged in learning about biology in courses that are dedicated to non-major students. The other challenge is that a lot of these non-majors intro bio courses tend to have fairly large enrollments. So it's hard to really get to have the opportunity to work with our students in ways that challenge them in terms of the conceptions and perspectives that they bring with them to the course, but to really to get them to ask questions, things that are going to really foster their curiosity, to really get them to gain the confidence and the self-efficacy to say, I'm going to find out this answer to this question and learn from it. So before I get too much farther into this particular presentation, I want to acknowledge the work of my two colleagues. They were instrumental in this particular work. So the first acknowledgement goes to Muzna Abrar. She did her undergraduate research thesis with me and was an absolutely fantastic student partner. So together we spent a fair amount of time actually looking at this course and working collaboratively to redesign it and design the assessments that we'll be speaking to in this presentation. And the second acknowledgement goes to Dr. Patty DeJure. She is an educational development consultant at the Taylor Institute for Teaching and Learning at the University of Calgary. And I really owe a lot to her in terms of mentoring me through the process of making use of infographics in undergraduate courses, but also ways in which we can assess them. So this work was published in the Integrating Digital Literacy book just a few years ago. So I wanted to first start by asking the question, what is digital literacy and why does it matter in the context of non-majors introductory biology courses? So I really like Martin's work when it comes to defining what digital literacy is. So in Martin's work, the definition is given as the awareness, attitude, and ability of individuals to appropriately use digital tools and facilities to identify, access, manage, integrate, evaluate, analyze, and synthesize digital resources, construct new knowledge, create media expressions, and communicate with others in the context of specific life situations in order to enable constructive social action and to reflect upon this process. So if we start to unpack this in terms of a non-majors intro bio course, how does this apply? Well, what my colleagues and I like to kind of remind ourselves is that our students who are non-majors in intro biology courses are the next community of voters. These are the people that are going to decide how much emphasis should be placed on STEM in our growing knowledge-based economy. So really empowering students to learn more, to ask questions, to critically analyze what they're being exposed to in terms of different types of media is really quite important. So this becomes even more important when we start looking at this idea of what different types of media, mostly digital media, is currently publishing in terms of whether these facts, whether these stories are accurate, or whether they could be labeled as something we've heard altogether too many times, fake news. How can we empower our students who are non-majors to really distinguish between facts that come from published peer-reviewed studies that are generalized to the public and things that maybe have been reported in ways that have skewed what the original intent of the study was? So we wanted to explore how we could redesign our course in a way where we could empower our students with digital literacy skills that would be important to allow them to become better at distinguishing between fact and fiction. So if we look at some literature that speaks to the power of digital literacy, Guess and al. In a 2020 paper showed that the introduction of a small amount of instruction in media literacy could actually help improve the ability of non-specialists in the general public actually identify false claims in online media. Kottner also contended that non-STEM majors in particular may have specific interests in applying biology towards issues that relate to civic engagement, to environmental policy, but also to public health that might actually increase their motivation and interest in specific areas of biology that relate to those we see in biology majors. So we were really quite committed to seeking new ways to help students make meaning. So I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit more about the specifics of the course in a few moments, but this definitely was a formidable challenge. So we have in this course typically between 100 to 200 students that come from a lot of different backgrounds and come in with a lot of different interests. So we really use that as a richness that this course provided in terms of trying to come up with ways that would be engaging to students, but that could also allow them to make meaning in ways that are personally relevant to them. So this is when we turn to infographics. So infographics is really a technique that I personally had not tried before delving into this particular course. And if we look at the term infographics, it's essentially, we can split it up into two. So info, so information, graphics is graphics. So it's really looking at how can we present information in graphical ways. So we can use the work of Gover to define or describe infographics as visual representations of data that creatively combine and arrange text and various graphical components to tell a visual story about a particular topic. Now, infographics have been shown in the literature to have a fairly large number of educational purposes. They can be used to convey information. They can also be used to really allow students to show relationships between different concepts. They can also be used to have students demonstrate their understanding, but also can be used to persuade a reader in terms of different positionalities, depending on the context and content that you are asking your learners to use infographics in. So why did we actually use infographics? Well, the body of literature that has been published to date showing the effects or positive effects of infographics is growing. So I'm going to highlight just a few studies here. This is definitely not an exhaustive list of the benefits of the use of infographics, but a number of studies have shown that they can help students develop skills that are required to communicate information visually, but also to help them present complex information clearly. They can also help foster innovation in students and help them develop multimodal, but also digital literacy skills. They also, in terms of the actual schematics of the type of assignment, they actually require many of the same skills as those that are required to write a paper. So things like, how do you evaluate information sources? How do you synthesize that information? How do you critically analyze the information and put it together? We have also seen studies that have indicated that creating infographics also fosters student engagement, but also serves to motivate students to actually delve into their learning. There's a number of other studies that have shown that infographics help students strengthen their ability to convey science to a general audience, but also it helps them learn concepts and make meaning and make connections a lot more easily because they're really essentially encouraged in the creation of an infographic to start really thinking about those connections and articulating those connections for their audience. So a little bit about this particular course. This course is called Biology 205, very standard introductory biology course for non-majors. The course at the time that we redesigned it had 100 students, and they came from a very wide range of different non-STEM majors, but also these students came in at very different levels of progression in their degree program. So again, huge source of richness in terms of expectations, but also in terms of prior knowledge. The previous iterations of the course had made mostly use of traditional kind of instructor-focused strategies that relied for the most part on traditional assessments, and also fostered memorization approaches in learners. So we really wanted to step away from those more traditional approaches to find something that would really allow students to pursue interest, to make meaning in ways that were meaningful for their own personal lives and personal interests. So in terms of redesigning our teaching and learning approach, we really started by refocusing learning on biology through a series of case studies. And we selected those case studies or wrote case studies to focus on fake news or scientific misinformation in mass media. And what we did is we made use of a flipped learning format in combination with a team-based learning approach. So students were placed into teams using software called ITP metrics, and they were placed into teams in the first week of the term. And essentially, they would work within those teams throughout the entire semester that the course was running. So all of the assignments, all of the work that we did in class together was based on work within those actual teams. So in terms of the course as a whole, what we decided to do is to really focus on two main themes. So the first theme was to examine practical approaches that could be used to detect the presence of bias in the media by analyzing the logical structure and validity of arguments that were presented in various reports. The second theme focused on examining factors that influence how people develop, but also retain beliefs that relate to scientific information. So what we did throughout the course is started looking at various case studies taken either directly from different reports in the popular media and starting to understand how can we get to the core of the knowledge that is presented in those particular reports. And how do you even know whether that information is right or whether there are additional questions that should be asked when reading those types of reports? And because our students were coming from very different backgrounds, we were also encouraging them to bring their own stories, their own reports to class with them so that we could actually help them go through those reports and try to understand how can we break them down? How can we better understand whether or not this information is valid or whether we need to go back and do a little bit more research? So the course essentially structured around a capstone project that was worth 30% of their final grade. And what we asked our teams to do is to together select a claim in popular media that related to biology and to critically evaluate the scope, reliability, and validity of that claim. And what they would be having to do as an end product of that project is to prepare an infographic that both summarized their findings, but also help dispel any misconceptions in the general population about the validity of that claim. So in terms of learning outcomes for that particular capstone project, there were four. So they involved asking students to find reliable sources of primary scientific literature, and yes, primary scientific literature with non-major students to support or refute claims made in the media. We wanted to help our students analyze the logical structure and validity of arguments that were presented in media reports. Third, students were to demonstrate scientific and digital literacy through the use, analysis, and evaluation of appropriate resources. And finally, they had to articulate a considered opinion based on the logical analysis of scientifically reliable information. Now, how we structured this capstone project is we used a lot of scaffolding and we broke it down essentially into four different phases. And this was really important because, as I'll get to a little later on in this presentation, it's sometimes easy for students to miss or sort of kind of have incorrect perceptions of how long it's going to take to do this type of work. So we really wanted to help our students, go through this project successfully and really get a lot out of it in terms of their own learning. So our focus on popular media was really one that we selected because of concerns mostly in terms of non-major students, in terms of their ability to critically evaluate reports in popular media. So let me walk you through the 4 different stages of the work that was completed in that class. So in the first stage, students were asked to propose a certain claim that they wanted to actually investigate. So what we did is they all had to write about a half-page piece of text that essentially was an argument as to why they should be awarded that particular claim. And they had to present it in a 2-minute presentation in front of the other teams in class. Now, if 2 or more teams ended up selecting the same claim, the rest of the teams would actually vote for whoever had the most convincing argument as to why that particular team should actually investigate that claim. So it's a really fun way to have all the other teams look at the claims and get engaged with each other, providing each other with feedback as they were developing their arguments, as they were developing the claims that they wanted to investigate. In the second stage, we asked our students for an initial draft. So the draft included not a fully formed infographic, but rather a design description of what would go in their infographic and why. What are the pieces that they wanted to have in that particular document? What was the importance of each of those pieces? What sources were they using to support their argument as they were carefully examining the validity of the claim that they had selected? In the third phase, this is where we really spent most of our time looking at infographic production, but also the production of documentation, where each team was asked to describe in a short written text why they chose the design that they chose for that particular infographic. What graphs they select, why did those selections happen? Why do they believe that those selections are compelling for their readers, for their audience? In the last stage is where our students were asked to prepare and deliver a 5-minute oral presentation to the other teams at the end of the term, essentially going through the infographic that they prepared and the argument that they had created, looking at whether or not the claim that they had selected was valid or not. So this took 12 weeks. So this was spread over a 12-week term with us looking at this, working on this together in class as much as possible. Now, in terms of getting non-major students used to delving into the primary but also secondary literature, what we made use of is something called the CREATE method, which was first published by Hoskins about 10 years ago. And to give you a sense of what the CREATE method involves, in case that you have not used it to date. So CREATE is an acronym that stands for consider, read, elucidate a hypothesis, analyze and interpret data, and finally think of the next experiment. So what we would do is we would select short primary literature articles that would align with some of the case study work that we would do in class together. And we would use the CREATE method to gain self-efficacy in both reading primary literature, but also knowing what types of questions we can ask when we read primary literature and how to find that information. So in the first step, this is where it's called the consider step. So here is where we have early thoughts on the introduction, and we generate concept maps based on the knowledge that we're getting on that paper. The second stage is read. So this is where we look at early thoughts on the introduction through annotating and cartooning. In step 3 is elucidating a hypothesis. So this is thinking carefully through the data and defining a research question or hypothesis. In the analysis and interpretation phase, this is where we're looking at connecting data to methods and results, thinking about how the data were obtained, but also the study limitations. And finally, thinking of the next experiment. So what would you design as a follow-up experiment to the paper that you read? And this really helped our learners in terms of both understanding, okay, this is the claim that I want to investigate. This is, the body of literature I can turn to let me know, is this a valid claim or not? And this is how I can make use of that literature to support my argument. So we had 100 non-majors go through the process quite successfully. I wanted to share, and I will share with you 2 infographics for which I got permission from the students to share with you. So these are two of the infographics that were designed by our students. So one on bees, the other one on whether smartphones cause vision loss. So trying to disprove that particular myth. And again, these particular claims were selected by our students as their topic for their capstone project. And they spent most of the semester working together in their teams, working with myself, with Muzna in class to learn how to both structure the argument, find resources that would help them support their argument, and then finally create the infographic that you're seeing on screen at the moment. Now, at the end of the term, we asked our students to write a short written reflection based on the experience of both creating an infographic and also presenting that argument to their class. So this is a fairly long excerpt. I'll give you a few excerpts from this. So this particular student said that they felt that the greatest achievement of any course is walking away knowing that you have taken something of value, whether it's academic, personal, spiritual, work-related, etc. Having that feeling of growth is an accomplishment. And for them, that feeling was gained. For this course has changed their worldview. I won't read the whole thing, but at the very end, they also say, I took many things away from this course, and my greatest accomplishment was the accumulation of these factors that allow me to grow and expand my horizons. In terms of other interesting facts from self-reflections, 97% of our students reported having greater confidence distinguishing between pseudoscience and good science. And 91% of our students, which really surprises, actually mentioned that they were using the course material and the skills that they were acquiring to teach their friends and family about the different content that they were learning in class. Now, in terms of recommendations for success, so 4 main points we would like to share with you. The first one being, if you're thinking of applying or using infographics in your course, providing students early on with a rationale that explains why you're using them in the course. So for all of our students, this was their first experience in using an infographic or in creating an infographic. So it can actually become a little bit overwhelming at the beginning if you don't explain to them how you're going to go about doing that and the types of support that you're going to be offering your students as they're working through that assignment. Providing students with specific grading criteria and rubrics. I'm happy to share the rubrics that we have used for this particular course. And tied to that is making time in class really to support students working on the project and being prepared to provide technical support. So we made use of a software called PictoChart, where we could actually have different student accounts that were tied to the main account, but making time in class for students to actually work with their teams on PictoChart to learn how to use the software, to ask questions, to have those supports in place was really important. And finally, providing multiple opportunities for students to receive formative feedback. So not only did they receive formative feedback from myself, but they also had a number of steps along the 4 different stages where they actually did peer review. So they would read one another's work and provide recommendations, provide feedback to each other so that we could all improve in our work in creating infographics. So a short slide on the references. I'd be most happy to take up your questions. You also have my contact information on this slide. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Isabel. That was terrific. Let me just go to chat here if you want to. Yep, there we go.
Perfect.
Any questions, anybody?
There are questions in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, let's see. So how much time? Yeah, so that's a great question. So in terms of how much time, so we would meet every week for about 3 hours, and I would say about an hour to an hour and a half every 2 weeks was spent on this project or a portion related to the project. We really tried to integrate it as much as we can, as much as we could to the case studies and the work that we were doing across the terms, that students really felt like they could actually do this. Funny enough, what we noticed at the end of the term is actually we had a number of students actually switch into biology majors program, which was something we didn't expect. So we kind of laughed at that at the end of the day. I'm happy to send the rubrics out. Absolutely. If you send me an email, I'm going to send that out your way.
And the question around, have you used this in a science class, like a major class?
Good question. Yeah, we have been, so I'm actually mentoring some colleagues to do that now. And it's something that we're really excited to be able to launch in a bigger scale. But absolutely, I don't see why it wouldn't be able to use it in a class for majors.
And then resources that you shared with the students so they could create their infographic?
Great question. So we created a short document that described, what was an infographic, what elements should be part of an infographic. We also included links to infographics online so they could actually go and see what different types of infographics can look like. We wanted to give them as much flexibility as possible in terms of the final design of their product. So it was really taking up some of that class time and giving them a chance to go through those resources, to ask questions, to gain confidence in starting to tackle this type of assignment.
Thank you so much, Isabel. That was terrific.
Thank you.
And